The encounter. The mid-morning sun streamed through the large windows of La Bellevue Café, casting a warm glow on its wooden tables and vintage decor. The café hummed with a quiet rhythm, the sound of steaming espresso machines blending with the murmur of soft conversations. At a corner table near the window, Patricia sat alone, a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea beside her, and a well-loved paperback novel resting in her hands. Patricia, in her early 70s, exuded an air of quiet dignity. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and she wore a simple cardigan and a floral skirt that harkened back to an earlier time. Though her clothes were modest and slightly outdated, she carried herself with the grace of someone who knew the world well and cared little for fleeting trends. For her, this café visit was a cherished ritual, a moment to pause, reflect, and enjoy a book away from the bustle of life. Unwelcome attention. At a nearby table, two young men in their early 20s leaned back in their chairs, their conversation punctuated with occasional bursts of laughter. Both were dressed in trendy streetwear, their expensive sneakers propped on the edge of their table as if claiming dominance over the cozy café space. One of them, a tall man with bleached hair, nudged his companion and nodded toward Patricia. "Look at that outfit," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "Straight out of the last century." The other, a wiry man with a cocky smirk, snorted. "Think she's auditioning for a grandma fashion show? Look at those shoes, practically antiques." Their laughter rang out, drawing a few uncomfortable glances from other patrons. Patricia, fully aware of their mockery, chose to remain composed. She turned the page of her book calmly, her expression serene. Years of experience had taught her that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially with people too immature to recognize their own cruelty. But the young men weren't finished. "Do you think she's ever heard of the internet?" the wiry one added, eliciting another bout of snickering. The café's reaction. A few patrons exchanged uneasy looks but hesitated to intervene. The café owner, a middle-aged woman behind the counter, glanced over with a frown but seemed unsure whether to step in. The tension in the room was palpable, and the usual warmth of the café felt momentarily replaced by an awkward chill. One elderly man seated near Patricia caught her eye and offered a small, sympathetic smile. Patricia returned it with a nod of quiet gratitude before returning to her book. She sipped her tea, her hand steady, her posture unflinching. To her, the insults were nothing more than noise, brief, fleeting interruptions in an otherwise peaceful moment. Patricia had weathered far greater storms in her life than the childish remarks of two young men who didn't know better. A quiet strength. As the young men continued to whisper and laugh, oblivious to the discomfort they were causing, Patricia turned another page. Her calm demeanor was a silent testament to her inner strength, and though she didn't meet their eyes, her composed presence seemed to speak volumes. "Your words don't define me, and your laughter doesn't diminish me." But as much as Patricia was content to ignore them, the situation wasn't over. Little did she, or the bullies, know, someone was about to enter the café who wouldn't let their behavior go unchecked. Someone who held kindness and respect as non-negotiable principles. At that moment, the bell above the café door jingled, and Keanu Reeves stepped inside. Keanu's arrival. The gentle chime of the café door's bell signaled the arrival of a new patron. Most of the café's occupants barely glanced up, absorbed in their own conversations and quiet routines. Keanu Reeves stepped inside, dressed in his usual understated style, dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and a well-worn leather jacket. A baseball cap was pulled low over his dark hair, and his quiet presence blended seamlessly into the cozy ambience. Keanu loved places like this, intimate, unpretentious, and filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. He scanned the room briefly, his eyes landing on the corner where his mother, Patricia, sat with her book and tea. A small smile touched his lips as he began walking toward her. Observing the bullies. Halfway to Patricia's table, Keanu paused. His sharp gaze flicked to the two young men seated nearby, their laughter cutting through the café's otherwise serene atmosphere. He didn't need to hear their exact words to piece together what was happening. Their sideways glances at Patricia, the mocking tones of their voices, it was obvious they were targeting her. Keanu's expression darkened momentarily, though his demeanor remained calm. He watched as Patricia, ever composed, turned a page in her book and sipped her tea, seemingly unaffected by the taunts. Still, Keanu knew his mother well enough to recognize the subtle signs, her slightly straighter posture, the way her fingers lightly tightened around her teacup. She was aware of the cruelty but chose to rise above it, as she always did. Approaching Patricia. Keanu resumed his walk toward Patricia's table, his footsteps soft but purposeful. When he reached her, he leaned down slightly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hi, Mom," he said warmly. Patricia looked up, her serene expression breaking into a radiant smile. "Keanu, darling," she said, her voice filled with affection. She closed her book and reached for his hand. "Right on time." Keanu pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, his presence effortlessly commanding attention from those around him. The cafe seemed to quiet as a few patrons glanced over, some doing double takes as they recognized him. But the two young men, seated just a few feet away, were the most stunned of all. The bully's realization. The taller of the two men, the one with bleached hair, froze mid-sip of his drink. He nudged his companion, his eyes wide. "Dude," he whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" The wiry man frowned, following his friend's gaze. His smirk faltered as realization dawned. "No way," he muttered. "That's him. That's really him." They exchanged panicked glances, their earlier bravado evaporating. The woman they had been mocking moments earlier was now sitting across from one of the most recognizable and respected actors in the world, and he clearly adored her. A mother and son reunion. Unaware, or perhaps unbothered, by the growing attention, Patricia and Keanu settled into their conversation. Keanu reached for the menu, glancing at it briefly before setting it down. "How's the tea?" he asked. "Perfect, as always," Patricia replied with a soft laugh. "You should try it." "I might," Keanu said, leaning back in his chair. "How's your morning been?" "Oh, uneventful," Patricia said lightly, though her eyes sparkled with humor. "Just a bit of background noise." Keanu chuckled, understanding her subtle reference. He gave her a knowing look, his voice dropping slightly. "Background noise, huh? I think I noticed." Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "Not worth the energy, darling. Some people only know how to see the surface." Keanu nodded, his admiration for his mother growing even deeper. She had always been unshakably strong, her grace and resilience a constant source of inspiration to him. The bully squirm. At their table, the two young men squirmed uncomfortably, their earlier arrogance replaced by a sinking sense of dread. They exchanged hurried whispers, debating whether to leave or stay, but neither could bring themselves to move. The realization that they had mocked Keanu Reeves' mother, someone who had done absolutely nothing to deserve their scorn, was sinking in like a stone. Keanu, however, made no immediate move to address them. Instead, he focused entirely on Patricia, their quiet conversation filled with warmth and mutual respect. But as much as he appeared calm, the bullies would soon realize that Keanu wasn't one to let disrespect go unchecked. The confrontation. Keanu Reeves, seated across from his mother Patricia, continued their quiet conversation as if unaware of the two young men's furtive glances. But he had noticed every mocking comment, every sideways smirk, and the discomfort they had caused other patrons. Patricia had chosen to rise above it with her characteristic grace, but Keanu wasn't going to let the behavior slide. He placed his hand gently over his mother's and stood, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. The cafe grew quieter as patrons noticed the shift in his demeanor. Keanu turned toward the two young men, his expression calm but resolute. Addressing the behavior. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice steady and clear. The two bullies froze mid-whisper, their eyes darting to meet his. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation earlier." The taller man, his face paling, stammered, "Oh, we were just..." Keanu held up a hand, silencing him without raising his voice. I don't think there's any need to explain. What I heard was disrespectful, unnecessary, and frankly, cruel. The wiry man shifted in his seat, his smirk long gone. We didn't mean anything by it, he mumbled. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his calm tone carrying weight. Didn't mean anything by it? Let me ask you this, what did my mother do to deserve your comments? Was it her appearance? Her age? Or was it simply that she was sitting here, minding her own business? The lesson in kindness. The taller man looked down at the table, his voice barely above a whisper. We were just joking around. We didn't mean to offend anyone. Keanu nodded slowly. But you did offend someone. You created an environment where other people felt uncomfortable, where someone felt less than because of your words. And for what? A laugh? The cafe was silent now, all eyes on Keanu as he continued. Respect and kindness aren't optional. They're not something you reserve for people you think deserve it based on how they look or what they wear. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Patricia, seated behind him, watched her son with quiet pride. She had taught him these values, and seeing him stand up for them reaffirmed everything she had worked to instill in him. The bully's embarrassment. Both young men fumbled for words, their earlier bravado replaced by shame. We're sorry, the wiry man finally said, his voice shaking. We didn't realize. You didn't realize she was my mother, Keanu finished, his tone sharp. And that's the point. You shouldn't need someone's title or connection to treat them with basic decency. She's a human being. That should have been enough. The taller man nodded hurriedly, his face flushed. You're right. We were wrong. We're really sorry. Keanu's piercing gaze softened slightly. Apologies are a start. But what matters more is what you take from this moment. Think about the way your words and actions affect others. Next time, choose kindness. The cafe responds. As Keanu stepped back to his seat, a ripple of murmured agreement spread through the cafe. One patron, an elderly man seated near Patricia, spoke up. He's absolutely right. We see this kind of thing too often, and it's about time someone said something. Another customer, a young woman with a toddler, added, You never know what someone's going through. A little kindness goes a long way. The bullies, thoroughly chastened, mumbled their apologies again before quietly gathering their things and leaving the cafe. As they slipped out the door, the atmosphere in the room shifted, lighter, warmer. The patrons exchanged small smiles, a sense of shared understanding settling over them. Keanu's quiet grace. Keanu returned to his seat across from Patricia, his expression softening as he met her eyes. Sorry about that, Mom, he said, his voice gentle. Patricia reached out, placing her hand over his. There's nothing to apologize for, darling. You did the right thing. Keanu smiled faintly, lifting his teacup. You taught me that. Patricia's gaze sparkled with pride. And you've taught me that the lesson stuck. As they continued their coffee and conversation, the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm. But for everyone who had witnessed the encounter, the moment lingered, a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right, delivered with the quiet strength and grace for which Keanu Reeves was known. A lesson in respect. The cafe door jingled softly as the two bullies hurried out, their heads down and faces flushed with embarrassment. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension dissipating in their absence. A few patrons exchanged looks of quiet satisfaction, while others offered discreet nods of approval in Keanu's direction. The moment had left its mark, not just on the two men who retreated awkwardly, but on everyone who had witnessed it. Patricia's grace. Keanu turned back to Patricia, his mother still seated serenely at the corner table. She sipped her tea, her demeanor as composed as ever. If the incident had rattled her, she showed no sign of it. You handled that beautifully, Patricia said, her eyes twinkling with pride. But you didn't have to. I've dealt with worse in my time. Keanu leaned forward, his voice soft. You shouldn't have to deal with it, Mom. No one should. Patricia chuckled lightly, setting her teacup down. Oh, darling, people underestimate me all the time. It's nothing new. If anything, it gives me a quiet advantage. I get to see their true colors before they realize who they're dealing with. Keanu smiled, shaking his head. You've always been stronger than me. Patricia reached out and placed a hand on his. And you've always been more patient than me. That's why you're good at moments like these. You turn them into lessons, not battles. A mother's influence. As they resumed their conversation, Keanu found himself reflecting on how his mother's strength had shaped him. Patricia had always been a pillar of quiet resilience, teaching him the value of kindness and composure even in the face of cruelty. Growing up, he had watched her navigate challenges with grace, her actions speaking louder than words. You know, Keanu said after a pause, a lot of what I do, how I treat people, it's because of you. I saw how you handled the world, even when it wasn't fair. You never let it make you bitter. Patricia smiled warmly. And look at you now. Standing up for people, showing the world that kindness still matters. I couldn't be prouder, Keanu. He nodded, the weight of her words settling into his heart. I just hope the message sticks with them. A subtle lesson for the cafe. Before long, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the atmosphere in the cafe remained reflective. Keanu glanced around the room, noticing the thoughtful expressions on the faces of other patrons. He decided to leave them with a quiet but powerful reminder. As he rose to pay for their drinks, he addressed the room in his characteristically humble tone. I just want to say, thank you to everyone who stayed and watched what happened earlier. It's not always easy to step in when you see something wrong, but even just being present can make a difference. A young woman near the counter spoke up, her voice timid but sincere. What you did was amazing. I wish I had said something sooner. Keanu smiled gently. It's not about being perfect or always knowing the right thing to say. It's about caring enough to try. We all have a role to play in making the world a little kinder. A ripple effect. As Keanu returned to his seat, the patrons began to murmur among themselves, inspired by his words. Some shared their own stories of standing up for others, while others resolved silently to do better in the future. Patricia watched her son with quiet pride as he settled back into the chair across from her. You know, she said, her voice light with humor, if you ever get tired of acting, you'd make a wonderful philosopher. Keanu chuckled. I think I'll stick to the day job, but I'll keep that in mind. The two of them resumed their conversation, the earlier tension now a distant memory. Around them, the cafe buzzed with renewed warmth, the lesson in respect leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had been lucky enough to witness it. A ripple effect. By the time Keanu and Patricia left La Belle Cafe, the encounter had already begun to ripple outward. Among the cafe patrons that day was a young woman named Sophie, who had quietly captured the entire incident on her phone. Moved by Keanu's calm but powerful defense of his mother and his message of respect, she decided to share the story online. A viral moment. Sophie posted a short video of Keanu addressing the bullies, paired with a heartfelt caption. This morning, I witnessed something incredible. Two men mocked an elderly woman at my local cafe, thinking she wouldn't stand up for herself. But she didn't need to, her son did it for her. That son? Keanu Reeves. He reminded us all about the importance of kindness and respect, and his mother's grace was a lesson in strength. We can all do better. #BeKind #Respect Matters. The post quickly went viral, garnering millions of views and shares within hours. Comments poured in, praising Keanu for his humility and standing up for what was right. Many people shared their own experiences with bullying or moments when they wished they had spoken up for someone else. Accountability for the bullies. As the video spread, the identities of the two bullies didn't remain anonymous for long. A few cafe patrons recognized them and called them out online, tagging their social media profiles. Facing public backlash, the two men issued apologies, admitting their behavior was unacceptable. We were wrong, one of them wrote in a post. Keanu Reeves called us out, and we deserved it. But the real hero was his mom. She showed more dignity and strength than we did. We're sorry for the hurt we caused. While their apologies didn't erase their actions, the public accountability forced them to reflect on their behavior and, hopefully, learn from the experience. Inspiring change. The story resonated deeply with people worldwide, sparking conversations about kindness and respect. Many commented on how Patricia's quiet strength had inspired them just as much as Keanu's words. She didn't even need to say anything, one user wrote. Her grace spoke louder than their insults ever could. Another shared, this reminds me to teach my kids about respecting everyone, no matter what. We need more people like Keanu and Patricia in the world. Back at the cafe, the patrons who had witnessed the moment firsthand continued to carry its message. The elderly man who had smiled at Patricia earlier vowed to speak up next time he saw someone being mistreated. The young woman with the toddler started a small kindness campaign in her community, inspired by Keanu's words. A quiet moment of reflection. For Keanu and Patricia, the incident was just another reminder of the values they held dear. Sitting together at another cafe a few days later, they reflected on the impact of what had happened. Who would have thought, Patricia said with a wry smile, that my quiet morning tea would cause such a stir? Keanu chuckled, stirring his coffee. You've always had a way of making an impact, Mom. Even when you're not trying. Patricia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. And you've always had a way of making me proud. As they finished their drinks, Keanu glanced out the window, watching people pass by. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for moments like these, moments where small actions could create meaningful change. A lasting legacy. The story of Keanu and Patricia's cafe encounter became more than just a viral moment. It was a catalyst for change, inspiring countless others to treat people with respect and to stand up against injustice. And for Patricia and Keanu, it was another chapter in their shared commitment to kindness, proving that even in the smallest places, like a cozy cafe, big lessons could be learned. As they left the cafe, arm in arm, Patricia smiled up at her son. You know, she said, her voice light with humor, you're not just my son, you're my favorite person. Keanu laughed softly. And you're mine, Mom. Always.